Hello and welcome. I'm very happy to have with me the history faculty, at least 5 members of the history faculty at the National Law School of India University with me today for a kind of a fireside chat where we're going to talk about their research, their intellectual concerns, their academic trajectory, and how they put together the history major minor track as part of the NLS BA. We have got a number of questions from people who follow our social media and our website, and people who are interested in the NLS BA, parents, teachers, prospective students, about our faculty and their current research work, their profiles, and things like that. So this conversation is basically to kind of show off our kind of very well regarded faculty and people who do diverse kinds of history, who come at the discipline in diverse ways, and will tell us a little bit about how they do history, why they do history in this conversation. Without further ado, let me introduce who we have here. I have with me today Megha Sharma, and Megha will talk about her research and intellectual agenda as the conversation progresses. Shamya Ghosh, Vanya Vaidehi Bhargav, Chandrabhan Yadav, and Kena Wani. All the 5 are part of our history faculty, but they will also teach some other courses in not only as electives, but in the common core in the NLS BA that we have designed. And we will get to know a bit about them, each of them, in a little bit. My first question to our illustrious gang of historians here is what drew you to history and what kept you going? I'm guessing some of you may have studied other disciplines at an earlier stage and later switched to history in the graduate school stage, and some of you carried through with history right throughout. If you can talk about why history, what drew you to it, and what keeps you going. Anyone?
So if I can start, because okay.
No,
sure. Go.
Because
go
I just
for
have
it.
a bit of a short response to this, and that'll also give a chance for my colleagues to respond to this. So I started with history from my graduation, and I've stayed on through my master's, MPhil, and to PhD. What drew me to history was the fact that it allowed me to speak and think about many issues through it. And I feel that my profile right now, as someone who has also been an archivist for digital archives, have also been researcher with labor institutes, and now is teaching at a department, also speaks of that diversity, which is something that I pursued. And basically, how grounding myself in history allowed me not only to think about the past, but also make sense of what's happening around me at that moment. So that conversation, plus the joy, just the sheer joy of discovering new things through the archives, is a very exciting and a thrilling process.
So thanks. Vanya, do you want to go next?
Yeah, I was just saying also a very brief answer, but I was always very interested in politics, and just to understand politics, I think it's always important to go back to history, and it always kind of widens your perspective. So that was really, my interest in current politics, and also to be a citizen who is well informed. That is what led me to the college.
Yeah, can I? Yeah. I think for me, I started actually with political science and then shifted to history. But for me, broadly speaking, social sciences from the very beginning, since I think I was in school as a teenager or when I was in college, I always had these kind of, pressing questions, like gnawing questions and curiosities about my immediate social and cultural surroundings, like, why do I have to follow certain rules? Why do certain people don't have to follow these rules? Or, why am I being associated with some identity and others are being associated with a different identity? So for me, and these were very basic questions that I had as a teenager. So for me, social science was an obvious choice. And eventually, I think history really helped me in this endeavor to understand, with my BA, MA, and now PhD, I've realized this very complex world that we inhabit. with, all of us have different kind of identities, and history really allows us to understand how these institutions of power over the years have come into being, how these social structures of power, such as, identities of caste, gender, class, or various identities that we associate ourselves with, how did they come into being, how were they made, unmade, and even challenged over a period of time, right? And so ultimately history, just like all social sciences, I think really helps you make sense of the world that we live in. And that for me is extremely important.
Chandrabhan?
Yeah, so I was basically a math student till my 12th, and I did physics, chemistry, math, and afterwards I entered into history because I was interested in literature. And while doing graduation, I decided to pursue early India because of the teacher. The early India teacher was probably amongst the best. Uh, so these accidents landed me to JNU, where I did my master's and MPhil and PhD, everything. And I do early India, and I work on the Jatakas. So you in provocation you asked about uh, what made you to continue and pursue this till for last 15 years. I'm doing history now, so I work on the jatakas, and these are the narratives from the Buddhist genre, and this sheer similarity of human concerns, their fears, desires, problems. The sheer similarity of us from those beings who were there in the remote past kept me moving to know more about and to explore more such similarities which we see. So it was exciting to see the similar fears, desires, concerns, problems, issues uh,
Mm.
from the people who were there probably 2000 years back from now. From so that kept me going and exciting. So sources, I must say, the sources coming from the remote past kept me going with this persuasion history.
Fantastic. I will have a question for you about that later, Chandrabhan, about the construction of the term pre-modern and what that might mean in today's world, especially. But I'll move over to Chandrabhan. Sorry, to Shamok.
Hi, Atreyee. I mean, much like Chandran, I also I studied PCM and biology in my plus two. And then I went on to do English literature. I was a lit grad in my undergraduate years. And I can actually kind of remember, that event in my life when I felt drawn towards history. It was when we were being taught Macbeth in our English literature classroom, and our professor was telling us about why Shakespeare would begin a play with, something so shocking with the three witches, and in an afternoon. And he was like, well, you have to think that there are people who have come there to watch the play, and he has to catch their attention, which is why the witch is introduced before anyone else. And this led me to think more about, the social history of English theatre in the early modern period, the rivalries between Swan and Globe and Rose Theatre, and the kind of very cutthroat world of drama that from which Macbeth emerges. So, in other words, a whole, socio-cultural context that history would allow you to see. So this is when I actually felt more, kind of gradually drawn towards history. And over the years, I then ended up writing my master's thesis on art history, company paintings. I actually began my kind of early academic life as an art historian, and then moved on to do a PhD from Columbia University in South Asian history. And the reason why I continue to do this work is because I feel that we are moving through history. Everything around us is historical, right? And there is no way to kind of say something, I feel, without being grounded in history. And history is everywhere today, be it newsrooms, be it boardrooms, be it your drawing rooms, it's your cocktail conversations. Um, you are kind of drawn in different ends with history. So that's also the kind of excitement of being in the thick and thin of things that kind of keeps me hooked to the discipline in the moment.
Thank you. These are fascinating responses. And so I guess I have two questions. One is for Chandrabhan especially, but others can jump in also on that. But I'll ask the first one that's striking me now, that was it Fernand Braudel who had this idea of that real change takes over long arcs of time? Am I right? Am I right? Okay.
Yeah,
And long durée, yeah, right, like change is not does not mark itself through a matter of moments or even decades or even question of 50 or 70 years. Change happens across hundreds of years or even thousands of years. History seems like all of you, some of you on my right are kind of modern historians. I know that Kena is a post-independence historian of South Asia and India, and and the other two on my left in this visual are more kind of early modern, and Chandrapan being in the deep remote past. How do you see this question of change occurring in kind of long swaths of events and long arcs of time, the long durée? Can we really see? I mean, are we being in the other social sciences as compared to history? Are we being myopic? And if we don't have a historical, borrowed from the historians, a historical perspective in every other social science, are we losing out? This is something I think about in my own work every day. And I want to pose that question on you. If you're not thinking about, whatever, planning or the Indian national movement or laws of labor and social justice, or even art history or literature in Pali, all of these kind of tapestries through which large kinds of change are being mapped. How do you map it, and are other disciplines impoverished for being less attentive to this? Anyone?
Yeah, so
Go ahead.
actually, yeah, thanks for invoking Brodel, who talks about this longevity idea. Now, so I'll just give this anecdote. I often do this exercise in my classes where I ask students to write about their religious beliefs. What is their conception of religion? What is their conception of God or supernatural entity? And more often than not, we notice that the way they frame their religiosity and the conception of supernatural entity is pretty much rooted in, let's say, 6th century BCE. So
Really?
even if they are, even if they say that I'm Nastika or something, more often than not, the Upanishadic borrowings, more often than not, some sort of Vedic borrowings, some sort of Puranic borrowings. So everything will end up entering into that long history of early India, what we call 6th century BCE to till 6th century CE, where all the religious worlds were in a way shaped, which in a way continuing till today. So the another example I'll just give. So what is happening in modern India, if we look at these figures, Gandhi, Ambedkar, Vivekanand, all of them are in a way when they are trying to talk about their religious frames, they too are going back to the early India. And Vanya is here who works on Lala Lajpat Rai, Arya Samajis. Arya Samaj is rooted in the Vedic. Their slogan was "Go back to the Vedas." Vivekanand was Ram Mohan Roy, Vivekanand Upanishadic. kind of thing, because Gandhi drawing a lot from Jainism, which again goes back to 6th century BCE. The whole four precepts, Satya, Aste, Ahimsa, is basically the Jaina principles. So if we look at the thought world, especially the religious thought world of present day Indians, which is deeply shaped with this long history of what we can call Indian religions, Hinduism, different varieties of Hinduism, if we can add. So for me, that's the way, one example which we can give of longe dure kind of continuity from
Sure.
past to till present. Yeah.
Sure. Thanks. Anyone else?
If I may, Atreyee.
Yeah,
So, I mean, the longitudinal perspective is certainly something which is very attractive and has, especially for, let's say, histories of environment, histories of climate, which is a very different conception of time for that matter. The notion of time changes entirely. But in my own work, I would say I'm more interested in change, tracking change through ruptures. And the way I look at, in my current work, which is a history of, courtly encounters in the borderlands between cultures that are very different. On the one hand, Mughal, Rajput, and on the other hand, indigenous Daya-Hom courtly culture, and the way in which they interact to produce something which is, kind of conversational, what I call differences in ethic of historical being. There, I'm more interested in those specific moments when, when change is being enacted and change is kind of unraveling itself, and looking at the micro histories of these changes in the different contexts, laying them out. And the long picture, of course, is very crucial, because in the context of this work, if you were to understand the context of, let's say, Assamese nationalism in present day, you would have to go back to this moment. Or if you were to understand how NRC politics and what is the history of NRC politics, in order to kind of trace its cultural genealogy, you have to go back to this moment. So in many ways, the history of the national popular then takes us back to this 16th through early 19th century moment in the borderlands. So that's how my work kind of grapples with and resolves the problem of change, which I feel is at the very heart of the discipline.
Sure. Kina, go ahead.
Or if you're done with this question, it's fine.
No. Go ahead. We have time.
No, I think this long durée question and what both Chandrabhan and Shomak were talking about really brings us to this concept which is at the heart of history, which is all of us are trying to understand continuity and change, right, across a long swath of time period. And I think in different moments we are trying to understand what has changed and what has continued. And if it has continued, is it in the same form as it was in the past, or is it in some kind of a different iteration? So this one example, which is, a very non-academic kind of an example that I give to my students in my first history class, is that in order to understand the relationship between past and present, let's take an example from biology. So if we think about reproduction, then we as children carry imprints of our parents, grandparents, etc. But we don't look the same, right? There is something that has changed and something that has continued. So time, if history is a study of time, time also reproduces itself. And in this reproduction, the present will have imprints of the past and across a long duration. But this imprint will obviously be not the same as the past. So I think this is the way in which past, present continuity and its relationship can be considered to be at the heart of the study of history as a discipline, right? I mean,
Sure. Thanks. That's fascinating. Yeah, Vanya and Megha, did you want to jump in?
I just quickly want to respond to one of the aspect of your question, which was to do with how it speaks with other disciplines. And it's also a question that comes to us often in the classroom, that what separates, for instance, history from sociology and other disciplines. And I try to give the example that the model of what, why, and when. So what happened, why it happened, and when it happened. So with historical research, we try to pin it down to the why did it happen in this particular year. In that, it rethinks the relationship of space and time. So a good historical paper would help you in understanding that why it could happen at this time and not at any other time, and why is it important in understanding that event in itself. Which
Wow.
also leads
Yeah.
to this
Yeah.
question, which also leads to the larger question that how far back in time do they need to go for each of the questions? So,
So.
for instance, they want to talk about something contemporary, how far back do they need to go? And it's through this repeated exercise that they can, we as researchers and also students and everyone else can engage with that where it begins to be relevant and where is it that the conversation needs to pick up.
Right. Thank you. This is a fascinating conversation. I want to push forth, but we are running out of time, so I'm going to move track. I had a quick question for Chandrabhan, which I was forgetting, but I won't forget, which is that this category pre-modern has a lot of purchase in the modern world, right? Like in public discourse, everyone is saying in the pre-modern world we had, say, some golden age or something else, and there are various claims made on the pre-modern. How do you see, and do you at all see the pre-modern having a kind of afterlife, or a chunk of time which you're calling remote past or deep time, having a kind of afterlife, being repackaged as something else, like an object or a fetishized kind of museum display or something which lives on in the current time?
Yeah, definitely. Actually, I often say that ancient India is not that ancient now. I mean, it's everywhere. And I just,
So,
this example of religion and religiosity I just gave. But I would like to invoke Sheldon Pollock at one place. He says that to understand what modernity brings, you need to also get a sense what was there before. So what was changed with the modernity or with the colonial phase? To understand that, we need to know what was there before, and then we
so,
can compare whether it changed or not. So then there is this fetishized uh, pre-modern world, not only fetishized, sometimes uh, in a way taking a violent route as well, I must say. So how to then, as a concerned citizen, how to then constructively and compassionately deal with the pre-modern past, and to see probably uh, this pre-modern past as plethora of experiences which this past provide, or as the way you are putting it, fetishized object as it is there in the popular realm now. So that is why it becomes very, very crucial to carefully and very, I must say, in a way, methodologically, we should approach this past,
oh,
so
sure,
that the fetishization, and although historians can pretty much participate in that fetishization project,
of course.
we can't deny that. But keeping in mind the kind of future we want to envisage, and the way we want to live together as human beings, if we can think of doing history of pre-modern times in a constructive and probably what Krishna Kumar says, history for peace, then it will be probably helpful, and that is what
Sure.
we are trying to do.
Sure, sure. Thanks. I'm going to move track, and these are conversations we should have in our training center, canteen, and other places for much longer. I want to know about your current research, and if you can frame it, especially your responses in terms of what questions are you asking of the discipline and the knowledge project as at large? What methods are you deploying? And what is the background context or theme or topic that you're interested in pursuing? You can and any combination of these three things would be very nice if you can speak to. So yeah, who wants to go first? I'm going to cold call Vanya.
Okay, so I'll give you a background of my previous research. So my PhD was on, I'm an intellectual historian, so I focus on the history of ideas. And I specifically focused on nationalism and Hindu nationalism. I chose Lala Lajpat Rai as a kind of, I don't want to say vessel, but he was kind of the person that I used as an entry point to explore this, ideology. And the point was to highlight internal differentiation within Hindu nationalism. So not all Hindu nationalism is Hindutva. And then what implications does that have for our conceptual understanding of this ideology today, and also what new possibilities of politics also can that open up. And that was published as a book. Now I am trying to understand the other side. That's the future project that I'm dreaming of, that I need to start working on actually now, which is a contested history of secularism. So I wanted to actually see why have people in the past, in the pre-colonial, in the colonial period, 1885, maybe going up to 1950 as well, going over onto the other side, why did various people want to separate religion from politics? For what ends? For what, normative values, equality, liberty? What was it that kind of drove this project? And were they like diverse conceptions, and were they kind of sometimes overlapping, sometimes, conflicting also? And does that teach us something about the, history, the presence of secularism today, the present politics, why it's also under threat?
Vanya, can you talk quickly about how to do a history of ideas, just for our audience to know who may not have come across the term intellectual history before?
My approach was kind of I was inspired by my own PhD supervisor, Faisal Devji, who he doesn't really have a framework or methodology, although he not explicitly, but he does. So he kind of really goes and follows the texture and the logical reasoning of a person's thinking. So really put yourself in that person's shoes and follow how counterintuitive it might be. So people can put, often we understand ideology as, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. That's how we understand it. But sometimes in history, people have done A, B, C, G, P, Z, X.
Right. Not in the sequence that we might imagine.
Yeah. So really following that reasoning and giving it, integrity. And then I kind of combine it. I'm so sorry, there's my dog over here. Combine it with whatever I've learned from political theory. So analytical rigor and kind of bringing concepts to that project and clarity about what is the concept that is being used here and what is this? Yeah, I'll stop there.
Right, thanks. Who wants to go next? Megha? Okay, McKenna, go ahead.
No, Megha can start. It's fine. I just thought I'll...
Go ahead.
Yeah. So I guess my research, as Atreyee, you already mentioned, I look at post-independence history. And I study the intersections between state, business, and developmental practices in mid-20th century India. So, I also go in the colonial period, so early 20th century from 1920s, 30s to around 1970s. And the reason why I'm studying this period, my broader questions that I'm asking is actually got to do something with the post-1990s period, that I'm interested in understanding what we today identify the socioeconomic condition as neoliberalism. Broadly associated with, of course, the 1990s liberalization, economic reforms. And the conventional study always begins with the 1990 as a moment of rupture, right? Once again, this change continuity question. It's either the 1990s or 1980s with the Washington Consensus in the United States. But I think as a historian, of course, I'm trying to understand the neoliberal predicament and the kind of, structures of power, inequality in economy, society, questions of labor, this ideas of political governance where public service is being, delivered by private entities. How did this social, political ideas of governance or society come into being? By looking at the preceding decades of the 1980s and 1990s, right? That what is it in these preceding decades of middle 20th century, early 20th century, what kind of how I'm basically arguing that this period was an incubation period for the 1990s, and it's important to understand that incubation to eventually make sense of this condition that we identify as neoliberalism today. So that's basically my research.
Nice. Thanks. Miga.
I work for my thesis, at least I've worked on labor law, but I'm generally interested in informality and basically what is it that gets considered as work and how closely it relates with wage work. With that, I try to do a social history around caste, gender, and the questions of identity, the way in which they get submerged or they get redefined when we think of a worker. And given that I work on labor history, conventional archives have unfortunately always failed me. So I have relied a lot on oral history, for which I have been taking interviews. That has pushed me out of the historical archives onto the field. I'm now expanding and building on my interest in labor law. And currently I'm developing a project around gig work. And that's what I find interesting is that how something which is happening contemporary has so many resonances to the historical past of workers' resistance. So essentially picking up social media and the protest, and within that, what kind of agency or surveillance is possible through digital platforms, as well as how workers are mobilizing it. I'm also, with that, working on an edited volume which speaks directly on legal history and the way in which contemporary popular movements are a way in which are a way for us to push how we rethink the relationship between law and society.
Wow, thanks.
And yes, of course, I also I'm interested in global history and have been pursuing through labor as well as through law global history as well.
Which means that in history that is not organized in national terms. Am I right?
But also global history per se. So just what global history means, how it has been. So I'm a part of a couple of global history networks through which we have been writing as well as organizing workshop that looks at what global means changes for each country. And more importantly, how do we get global history to our classrooms? So we have conversations from different contexts where we come together to develop curriculums, to see what works, and to basically learn from each other.
Right. Thanks. We'll go back in time. I'll ask Shomok first, who's early modern, and then the remote past historian.
All right. So my currently I'm working on like 3 projects to be precise. My first book, which is where I recover a trans-regional material and cultural history of courtly encounter between the Persianate Mughal court and the indigenous Taya home court in Brahmaputra Valley between the 16th through the early 19th century. There are 2 pegs to this work. The first is it recovers the ways in which Mughal political culture was localized in the borderlands of imperial contexts. And here we are talking about the Timurid Mughal Empire. And this also then lets us see how diverse the idea of who a Mughal was and what Mughal meant in the early modern period was. The other peg to this work is through theories of kingship. What I also try to do is I kind of recover political theories from the margins of the empire and show how these ideas traveled through networks that were both monastic networks, courtly networks, which involved the Vaishnavites, which involved, courtly figures as distant as Brahmaputra Valley and Western India, and also Southeast Asia, most importantly. So I kind of also propose a different kind of geography in terms of my work for in with respect to political imagination in the early modern period. And in my book, the project that I'm talking about, I deal with a range of sources. I look at inscriptions, coins, architecture, chronicles, paintings, legal digests. In other words, I kind of have to generate my own, archive of early modern cultural encounter, which one can call an archive of difference, if one may. The other work that I am doing right now is a work of translation. I am translating 15 presidential addresses of the Ahom Haitahaba, or the Assam Literary Society. These are all in Assamese, and they all talk about history. Now, this work, the reason why I am involved in this is also because this is a translation project that I have taken upon me to complete, but also it helps us chart out or understand the early phase of public intellectual history in the Indian context, right? What did it mean to argue for a history of a people or a history of a national popular in the mode of polemic? So this is what I'm interested in with this project. And the third is my second book, which is a history of illness, cure, and medicine in Highland Asia, where I look at monastic registers of cure of animals, of humans, occult practices, and the way in which an idea of multi-species history can help us understand what learning was from the perspective of not just the mind, but also the work of the hand, both knowing and doing, and how these two contributed towards an idea of learning in the early modern period, more from the perspective of what I would call a multi-species history, which considers both the human and the non-human at its core.
Right, right. Thanks. Chandrabhan?
Yeah, so actually my doctoral thesis was on this text called Jatak Atthavarnana, popularly known as the Jatakas. And with that text, I tried to understand social philosophy of Buddhism. And basically, the text is this corpus is in Pali. So I, in a way, critically examine that corpus to understand social philosophy of Buddhism. How Buddhists are, in a way, uh, mm, their attitude towards the Chandals, the hunters, forest dwellers, the upper echelons of the society, the Kshatriyas and the Brahmanas. So that was my doctoral thesis. And so that is one set of research which I am pursuing and publishing articles based on that thesis. But in 2019, I also got a fellowship, Navayana Dalit History Fellowship, and for that I'm working on a monograph which is tentatively titled as Following the Trail, Ambedkar Buddhism and Caste, where I'm in a way exploring Ambedkar's thought, specifically his thought on past. How is he thinking about past? So that's the other project which I'm doing. The third, and which is a very personal project, which is a translation of this, I must say, wonderful text called Therigatha, which is a Pali Buddhist text, probably oldest available text from South Asia, composed by women, the Buddhist nuns, the Theris. So I'm translating that text from Pali to Hindi and Bhojpuri. Half of the work is done, but a lot has to be done. So these three works are currently going. Yeah, thanks.
This is fascinating. I'm so enthused to hear about the diverse set of projects that all of you are immersed in. Before we close, I want to ask one last question. You have, as a team, designed the history major minor track. what is the most exciting thing about it? If you had to pitch it as a, kind of advertisement pitch, what would you say about it?
Well, if I may go, if I may take it, uh, I have, the way I look at it, there are two USPs of history at NLS. And the first is that we are probably the only university where we are offering, a course on entirely on legal history, which is also one of the major, kind of within the history major, which is one of the compulsory core that students would take up. So that's one of the concentration in legal history is one of the aspect. The other with which I am more involved is designing a course on public history, and the way in which we have also we are moving towards kind of more public history engagement in our program. We already have an elective in public history where we expose our students to also certain skill sets which are very important, which they can carry over to different fields like archives management or heritage and conservation, or like the relationship between history and policy and things alike. And we are kind of working towards developing that further. So these are the two things that I found personally very interesting while designing the course.
Anyone else?
If I can add, the most exciting thing for me with this course is its newness. It's new, and it's new in terms of. So I was teaching before NLS at Delhi University, and planning and changing the syllabus at Delhi University requires lots of time because of the institutional strains and the vastness of Delhi University as a system. So they are stuck, although those teachers too want to update their syllabus, but they are stuck with the institutional barriers. And we have been able to be free from that barrier, and our course is probably updated than Delhi University undergraduate history courses. So that is the exciting part.
That administrative ease is really important to recognize. I appreciate you saying that. The other three, anything else that strikes you as, kind of advertisement for your history major minor? Yeah, Megha.
So that's one thing that which I find quite striking is that history is often the most talked about, but not always understood very well in terms of what actually is history, what's past, and where to draw those lines. And I strongly sense that in all our courses, that is something that we have tried to maintain. The conversation of what exactly the historical methodology is, and we try to do it in a very interesting way, which is by introducing primary sources gradually to the students. So they do understand that not only what the discipline looks like, but how actually the historian works. So in that sense, I am quite excited about our historical methodology course as well, which is quite unusual in the way in which it is introducing history to the students through the classrooms, but also across all the courses where they'll be slowly introduced to theory as well as gradually becoming familiar and understanding what the historical sources look like. And as Chandraban also just said, that this balance between the old and the new. So we have tried to bring in the new scholarship while keeping conversation with the old scholarship. And that actually has been one of the biggest challenge, even in designing the course and translating into the classroom as well, where I feel that all our colleagues and the entire team has really worked quite hard to make it happen. Yeah.
Sure. Thanks. Anything else? Yeah, Kina?
No, I would actually just echo what my colleagues have said, that it's actually, and particularly, what Chandrabhan also mentioned, that this kind of the ability to, this old and new and the ability to craft your own syllabus, and the kind of ease with which you can craft your syllabus and the readings that you can include is something that's definitely I appreciate as a teacher, and I'm very sure the students will also find it very valuable. Another aspect, what Megha also talked about, Shomok talked about, is this historical methodology that we are in a very staggering way introducing them to not just the study of the past, but also how the past is studied, and introducing them to archives across different kinds of materiality, not just documents, but oral narratives, interviews, artifacts, objects. So in that sense, it's definitely, I feel, something unique, and definitely both teachers and students will find it immensely valuable.
Right. Vanya, anything else to add?
I mean, I would also again say the historical methods I think is great. I think also the cause of ancient, medieval, modern, of course. So it'll give people students a good sense of Indian
Right.
history and world perspective as well.
Great.
And then I'll just mention the two electives that I also was kind of, they align with my interests also. So it's a history of ideas. One is different nationalisms and their critics. So it's considering the situation in India and globally, I think it speaks a lot to the present. So I'm very excited about that. And similarly, religion and politics, a history of ideas. Again, something that I'm hoping and I'm quite sure that students will find very relevant to today as well. So
Nice. Thank you, everyone, for taking the time to talk to me today. Have a good night. And I'm sure people who watch this video can't wait to come and study with you in your classrooms and talk to you on the corridors. So thanks again. And I'll say goodbye here.